We're going to now look at a different area. We're going to look at mental health and architecture. We've got two fabulous speakers who are going to have a conversation about this. Naomi Stead probably doesn't even really need to be introduced to you. Professor Naomi Stead is the head of architecture at Monash University, a co-founder of Parlour, and the lead on the ARC linkage that led to the genesis of which was the genesis of Parlour. So she's currently starting some new work looking at mental health in within Australian architecture. Now she's joined today by Ben Channon. So welcome, Ben. Ben's from the UK. He founded and is the chair of the Architects Mental Health Wellbeing Forum in the UK. He's an associate in practice, but he's also a mental wellbeing ambassador, won many awards, an accredited mindfulness practitioner, and he's also got a TED Talk. So all sorts of things there. So I think we're just going to, I'm just going to hand it over to you two to discuss mental health. It'll be really great. Thank you.
So welcome, Ben. I'm really excited to have this conversation because I'm really fascinated to hear what you have to say, and also we've been very rigorous about not telling each other anything before now so that it would remain fresh.
It's all a secret.
Yeah, exactly. And what a corker of a session to follow also, and it obviously follows on quite nicely.
I just want to say before we start, they've all been amazing actually. All the speakers have been fantastic, and there was going for dinner last night after Sharon's speech, there was a real buzz, a real excitement, so thanks to everyone who's spoken so far, it's been fantastic.
So, Ben, you founded the Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum in 2017.
Yes.
Why was that? And can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I mean, the last session, there was a lot of talk about patterns, and I think we were seeing, certainly in the UK, a quite worrying pattern. The Architects Journal over there does student surveys every year, and we were seeing a trend in that of mental health in students particularly getting worse. I think it was the 2016-17 survey where they discovered that 52% of students were either having counselling or therapy for their mental health, or they were seriously concerned that they would need to in the immediate future. And you know, when you've got over half of students in a position where they're scared about their mental health, to me that wasn't good enough. I hate anecdotal data as well. I'm really against anecdotal data, but purely from my perspective as well, it's something I was seeing a lot of. I was hearing a lot of horror stories from within the industry. We've talked already again this week about people pulling out of the industry because of pressure or stress or a variety of reasons. And to me, again, that's not good enough. It's something that I felt we had to improve. So I sat down with my boss, John Assail, who, for an older white gentleman, he's very progressive on these issues. And he was really supportive and said, look, I really want to help you out here. Got in touch with some of his contacts from throughout the industry, particularly employers who are really well known in the UK for the way they treat staff, the way they look after staff, and we created this group, and haven't looked back really.
So, because you're in practice, you're a practicing architect.
Yes, qualified in 2014.
So, one of the major things that you've done so far in the Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum is the Architects Mental Wellbeing Toolkit.
Yes.
So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the main goals when we set up the group was to try and share some of the knowledge and the lessons that we'd been sort of sharing between ourselves with the wider industry. We've got 12 practices forming the group, and as you can imagine, within those practices there's so much knowledge. These are companies who are really, I believe they are doing the right thing, whether it comes to gender equity, the way they're thinking about mental health, all of these issues. They're the high flyers and they're setting the benchmark. And we wanted to share that knowledge with the industry, so we created this toolkit. It's quite short, it's quite punchy, and it's downloadable from our website, so please do download the PDF, print it out, share it around your practices. It's really been written so that it can help both architects in the industry or even students right up to employers, and gives guidance and advice as to kind of ways to improve mental health within your company.
So I guess part of the reason I'm so excited about this conversation is because many of the things that you've been doing with the forum and also with the toolkit is something we're also planning to do here.
Yes, and at risk of this turning into an interview with me, I want to ask you some questions back. You you're obviously undertaking this research project into mental health. I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about that. As we said, we kind of kept things a secret from each other. So could you enlighten me a little bit on that project?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing to say, which is kind of a trivial point, but sort of slightly amusing about the research context in Australia, is that we can't use the words mental health.
Oh, wow.
Because the Australian Research Council doesn't fund health research.
Okay.
So it's like this kind of curious coded thing where we talk about mental well-being and stress and architectural culture.
You'll note that we called the group the Mental Wellbeing Forum because we wanted to be quite clear. We didn't want to get embroiled in that risk of kind of giving mental health advice.
Exactly.
We're not mental health experts. We're a well-meaning group of people.
Yes, exactly. Well, and also well-being is a kind of more fulsome and holistic way of understanding. I mean, it's not necessarily just about diagnosable illness. And so our project, I mean, it's still, it's kind of probably bad. Where's some wood? For me to touch. It's probably bad luck for me to be talking about this because it's a grant application which is currently under development. It's hopefully will be submitted in the next couple of weeks. But it's been under development for some 2 years, and it's a linkage project like the one that led to Parlour. It has a huge number of industry partners, including the Institute of Architects, the ACA, the AASA, which is the Association of Australasian Schools of Architecture. But the principal one, and 5, I think, or 6 practices. The principal partner is the Architects Registration Board of New South Wales, which has already done some very valuable work in this area, it was, though, primarily a literature review, and all of the kinds of previous literature, including the Architects Journal surveys, is encapsulated in this quite comprehensive literature review. But one of the findings of that is that there is a need for primary research and that there is a need for further implementation or application of the research findings. And so, of course, that's what we specialise in, implementation and impact. So that's the hope, that we build upon the work that's already been done by the Architects Registration Board of New South Wales, who, interestingly enough, have a perspective from consumer protection. That's what the registration boards are about. So they're really, of course they're interested in well-being because they're right-thinking people, but they're also interested in architects who are not in a good state, not causing harm to the consumer. So, the rising tide lifts all boats. And if everybody has greater sense of well-being, then architects will be more able to fulfil their duties in a competent way. But I guess the other interesting point here is that you were saying that you'd observed anecdotally and otherwise that there really did seem to be emerging problems in the UK context. It's exactly the same here. Yeah, of course.
And I was keen to sort of learn a bit more about that. I mean, funnily enough, I was FaceTiming my dad on the way here this morning, and we were saying, he was saying, do you think they're facing the same problems in Australia that we're facing in the UK? And I said, it sounds like exactly the same set of problems. It's a long hours culture, it's very deadline driven. There's already been a lot of talk about this kind of macho problem that infiltrates the industry where I have to work harder than you, and then it becomes almost an arms race in terms of who can work the latest. And even though we're 10,000 miles apart or something, we seem to have the exact same set of issues. And for me, the cause of that, the root cause, is absolutely fascinating. We know now, I mean, there's so much research coming out about productivity and about working methodology. We know now that actually, I've heard people this week talking about doing 60, 70-hour weeks, and my jaw hit the floor. We know that that's not the best way to get the best out of people. And long term, that's going to lead to burnout, to serious mental health problems. And yes, you might be more productive in the first 2 or 3 weeks, but we know that from sort of week 4 onwards, you're actually way less productive than those people who are just living a good, balanced lifestyle.
But this is one of the things I find so fascinating about research and advocacy in this area, because obviously I'm an academic and an educator, and, a leader in the academic space. And when we, when we talk to students about time management, and we say, don't do all-nighters, or if we threaten to close the studios at 10 or 12 at night, mutiny. And they are like, no, we like doing this. It becomes encultured amongst the students as well, so I think they are encultured as students, but it's partly also because it's anticipatory. They think that this is what practice is like. But I think we would be remiss if we didn't recognise that some of the intensity, project orientation, project devotion of architecture is valued. People enjoy it. The camaraderie, the sense of achievement, the adrenaline, the intensity, I keep saying that, but the students love that too. And if you say, treat it as a job, work 9 to 5, manage your time, they think you're such a dag.
Lose the passion.
And you don't understand the industry. So you immediately lose all credibility when you start saying to them, be sensible and manage your time.
I agree, and we had an amazing talk at Grimshaw actually earlier this week, and someone raised the issue of kind of comfort zones. And to me, I think you're right, particularly with architecture students, you always want them to be sat maybe slightly outside their comfort zone. If you're always within your comfort zone, you're never going to be pushing the boundaries, you won't be achieving anything new or exciting. So I think it's about treading that very fine line between, pushing yourself, feeling slightly uncomfortable. And another thing I'm always really keen to press upon people is that stress isn't always a bad thing. There's a real danger when we're talking about mental health to frame stress as the enemy, but actually a little bit of stress can be a really good thing. If it wasn't for stress, we'd probably never hit a deadline. People would never get a first at university. Stress actually is a really good motivator, but everything needs to be in moderation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I was walking here this morning thinking about this, obviously we're both doing the same thing, I was thinking about my own mental health and how being busy is actually good for my mental health. Like if I'm insufficiently busy, or even sometimes, dare I say it, when I'm on holidays, I have a tendency to ruminate and, that's not necessarily good for my state of mind. So I think you're absolutely right that a degree of stress and, the concept of post-traumatic growth floats around these days, that if you push yourself very hard, you can grow from that. And we'd want our students to do that, as you say.
Yeah.
Well, and our staff. But, we were talking before about, some of you may have seen on Design, there was a bit of a discussion earlier this week about a conversation that had taken place between Harriet Harris, a very strong woman who is now the head of school, I think, at the Pratt Institute, had a conversation with Patrick Schumacher, of course, from Zaha Hadid Architects, in which she was saying we can't maintain the long hours culture. She's saying exactly what we're saying. And he was saying, what are you talking about? You're talking about some kind of stagnating socialist, utopia. We have to keep working 70-hour weeks because that's how we achieve what we achieve. So I guess, this is what we're talking about is not necessarily subscribed to by everybody.
No, it isn't. I think, first thing I'd like to say, just thinking carefully about whether I should say this, but it happened in the public domain, so it's fine to say it again. I went to a talk about 18 months ago in London where Patrick Schumacher was talking, and I actually asked him a question. I said I'd been at a party the year before, and a group of us were chatting, and this girl started falling asleep on the sofa at a house party, and we kind of were checking on her, checking she was okay and everything, and said, have you had too much to drink, or are we just really boring? And she said, oh no, I'm really sorry, I work at Zaha Hadid, so I haven't really slept this week. And so I sort of posed this to Patrick and said, do you think that the mental health of your staff is important? Do you think it's important that staff have a good work-life balance? And I think it puts it in context a lot. And Patrick's answer to me was essentially that he thinks this current kind of interest in mental health is a bit of a trend, it's a bit of a fad, and he's not quite sure about the validity of it. So I came away from that sort of slightly wanting to take everything he said in the future with a bit of a pinch of salt.
But, a very polite way of putting it.
But I think genuinely, though, it is a problem that we have with mental health, which is that because you can't see it, because it's not visible in the same way that you can't challenge the validity of a broken leg or appendicitis. But for a lot of people, that validity of mental health or a mental health problem, it doesn't necessarily become apparent until they've experienced it themselves or they've witnessed a close friend or family member go through it. So that's something we're always up against as well.
So, one of the things that I'm interested in our research project, and, presumably maybe in 8 years' time we'll be sitting here talking about that, let's hope, is really convening, obviously cultural change at a whole of profession level, nationally and internationally, just to be ambitious, but also destigmatisation. It seems to me to be absolutely essential that we make the space in which people can talk about these things in a very matter-of-fact fashion.
Yes.
Are you interested in that too?
Massively. For me, that's actually the biggest goal of the forum, is to get people talking about mental health. I would love us, as you say, to live in maybe 8-10 years' time, to live in an architectural world where it was absolutely fine to talk to your colleagues about your mental health, actually to say, To phone up in the same way you'd phone up and say, sorry guys, I've got a tummy bug, I can't come in today. To phone up and say, you know what guys, my head's not in a good place today, I actually do need a day off. And people wouldn't question that or challenge that. Everyone would be educated enough about the issue to say, oh, fair enough, they're not well today. And a lot of it's got to come top down. The problem for me is, I think at the moment, we're not necessarily getting a lot of senior people in architecture coming out and talking about mental health problems. I don't know if that's a similar issue over here.
Well, I think the conversation is happening. Certainly there's a perception in the profession here, and absolutely in the academy, that we have a problem. Like, it's a problem approaching crisis point. And, once again, it's anecdotal, so we need to do the research so we know for sure. But the number of students who are presenting with, common and garden business, like, depression and anxiety, that's, it's my bag. I don't have any of the fancy things, but the students, some of them have got compound, profound, pre-existing in some cases, severe and enduring mental illness, which we need to deal with in the university context. We have to look after these people. And there is, we need to have the tools and the knowledge to do that. Obviously, we're not psychologists, we're architecture educators, so obviously we need to lean on our support systems that the universities already have in place, and our colleagues and specialists in psychology and counselling. But I think we can do more than we are.
I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, it's been a contentious issue in the UK. We see, as at the forum, we're a group of businesses. We're trying to change the profession. Obviously, the profession and the education system are intrinsically linked, and we know that this culture does start at universities. But we're being quite cautious. We don't want to wade in and start talking about education policy, because that's not really our sphere. But it's been something that's been discussed a lot. Alan Jones, the incoming president of the RIBA, he's involved with Queen's University Belfast, so he's very, very interested about the relationship between education and mental health. I was kind of interested in what's happening in terms of the education system over here. Are things changing to try and support students better? Has there been a bit of a shift in the approach?
Yes. I mean, I would say, well, certainly I can really only speak for my own institution, which has very well developed support structures and programs, but it is still scrambling to basically catch up with the wave.
Yeah.
And I know we have problems at Monash. I mean, Monash, we try obviously to make a supportive culture. There's specific things that we do in the curriculum, and the way that we run our crits, and in the way that we set assignments, and the way that we tell students, okay, we expect this assignment to take you 3 hours, not 30. Don't spend 30, because a lot of students will spend 30, even, in fact, if you tell them to only spend 3. But things like that, those kinds of guidelines. But even within that context, I had an email from one of our current students earlier this year, which was an absolute eye-opener. So I don't know whether that person is here, but if you are, I salute you for sending me that email, because I knew we sort of had generalised problems, because everyone has generalised problems. I thought, okay, there's going to be some issues here with overwork and et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, for example, we had students having panic attacks either before or during class, particularly around presentations, not eating, nervous breakdown type, certainly leading towards nervous breakdown. And a kind of culture of masochism, as you say, a kind of arms race of who can be in the studio for longest, and not sleeping for 3 days, which is like basically an occupational health and safety problem. Like, God, I don't want someone walking home when they're that exhausted. They'll get hit by a car. So there is a lot in the university system here. All of the universities, I would dare to say, are right on top of this, because it's a particular issue for, or let's say the issues are particular for international students here as well, who have kind of cultural dislocation, language issues, and sometimes pre-existing conditions that they've come here with, which they're also struggling with. So, and having to kind of present their work in another language, in a specialised disciplinary language, it's like it's a wonder that they manage what they do.
Yeah.
But so is that, I mean, so what is there kind of institutionally in the UK? Like, maybe you can't speak of the educational institutions, but the RIBA and...
So we're very lucky to have a group called the Architects Benevolent Society in the UK. I don't know if there's an equivalent over here, but I think they were set up in the late 1800s, and really they were actually just a kind of support system for old retired architectural men, I think. That's the way many of these things started. But now they've really evolved over, particularly I'd say the last 20 years, their role has changed massively. And what they do now is support people throughout the industry who've undergone a range of traumas, a range of problems. So it may be, heaven forbid, I was to get knocked off my bike and couldn't work anymore on the way to work. I would be able to get funding and support from them while I couldn't work. And what they've really embraced in the last couple of years, and they've been working closely with us at the forum, is mental health care. And they've switched onto this really, really quickly. They've realised how big a problem it is. And there's obviously a real you can get a real snowball effect with mental health problems where it can lead to potentially time off work, which could lead to losing your job potentially, and then you're unemployed with a mental health problem. Things can go downhill very, very, very quickly. And if those support systems aren't in place, that's when we do see problems like homelessness, people being evicted. And so, you could be a youngish architect with a family, and all of a sudden you find yourself out of work, living on the streets. So what the Architects Benevolent Society has been really good at doing is actually trying to stop those problems before they occur. So anybody now in the UK, I believe from Part 1 architecture student all the way through, can log onto their website or give them a call, and they will put you in touch with a therapist within a couple of weeks generally. So that way you're kind of really addressing those issues before they start, which I think that proactive approach is something we all need to take. It's very interesting as well. Deloitte released a really interesting study last year, I believe, looking at kind of mental health spend in businesses. And they found that basically the earlier you spend your money, i.e. on intervention or prevention, rather than coming in and trying to firefight at the end, then the bigger return on investment you get. So you see about 8 or 9 times the return on investment if you invest in those kind of preventative measures, as opposed to kind of 1-to-1 returns if you're just firefighting and trying to fix the problem.
But that makes me think about a kind of really big question, or let's say problem, which has to do with, it's actually related to advocacy on gender equity. And it has to do with, Natalie yesterday was talking about, and in fact Jill just now was talking about the fix the women approach to gender equity, right? Which, is very common. It really is. And I kind of worry a little bit about the fix the mentally ill person approach to these questions. And, certainly speaking for myself, at times when I've felt like I was struggling, it's not helped me when I've kind of had the sense that people were saying, well, you'd be better if only you did more yoga.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's your fault. Find the time.
Yeah. And mindfulness and yoga they're not just a band-aid you can stick on a problem and make it go away. I think you're right. I think it really is. We kind of touched upon this already. It's about changing the culture, and it's about creating a culture. The phrase we say at our company is, it's okay to not be okay. And we need to realize that sometimes people aren't going to be okay. And I like to think about mental health, the insides of our brains as it's a little bit like a weather system. We have sunny days and we have rainy days. That's natural. Not everybody feels great all the time. And even if you don't have a diagnosed mental health problem, we're all going to have days when we feel a bit under the weather. We feel a bit low. We need a bit of help, a bit of support, motivation. And that's, to me, where this links back to the whole subject of this week, really. It's about creating environments that are more inclusive, whether that's inclusive of people of different genders, colours, sexualities, neurodiversities, or people with a range of mental health problems. I think everyone wins when we create a more diverse working environment.
But what about, to just push that question a little bit further, what about if a person's poor state of well-being is actually a rational and objective response to an unbearable situation? Yeah,
and I think, to be honest, that's the case a lot of the time. I certainly know, so I'll open up here and say I had my own problems with mental health, anxiety problems in my mid-20s, and that didn't just come out of nowhere. And I think most mental health problems, particularly the anxiety and depression you were talking about, they don't come out of nowhere. They're brought about by circumstance, they're brought about by problems. And again, something that's been made very clear over the last couple of days is that women in particular are facing a whole different set of problems and challenges to men in the industry. And so naturally, there's all these extra pressures, and that's bound to impact on mental health as well. So again, by improving those, I think we improve mental health across the board.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder about like so many of the challenges and issues that are facing architects in practice have to do with bad business practices.
Oh, for sure.
So, I mean, if you kind of follow the trail of breadcrumbs, you start with architects who are struggling, and students for that matter, who are struggling and have poor well-being. You follow the trail of breadcrumbs and you get back to fees that are too low.
Of course.
So, at what point do you try and intervene in that chain?
So, well, again, that's something we've been really keen to address in our toolkit, is the importance of contracts and client relationships. Actually, they're not immediately the sort of thing that jumps out at you and thinks this is going to affect people's mental health, but actually that underlines everything. That long hours culture is born out of either agreeing a deadline that's too soon, or agreeing a fee that's too low, so you don't have enough resources to put on it. So people end up working unpaid overtime just to make sure that you can actually achieve it. And yeah, it's good business is good for mental health. That's really important to state.
So what comes next for you? I mean, I'd be interested, this is a two-part question.
Okay.
I'm interested in what motivates you personally in working in this area, and also what comes next both personally, and for the Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum.
So, for me personally, my motivation was, as I kind of touched upon, I had my own problems with anxiety in my mid-20s, and it was probably born out of quite a lot of, I'd say, perfectionism, which is not uncommon amongst architects. A feeling that I had to be the best, and kind of talked about the different pressures on people of different backgrounds and genders. I think I probably felt as a middle-class white man, there was a hell of a lot of pressure to succeed on me because if I didn't succeed, there was nothing for me to fall back on. I couldn't say I've got any excuses. You've got to succeed as a middle-class white man. So I really was pushing myself way too hard, and I think really expecting far, far too much of myself as a 25, 26-year-old. And surprise, surprise, when you're working 70-hour weeks every week and you're just thinking about work non-stop, your brain doesn't like it very much. And I, again, as I said, anecdotally, it was something I saw happening around me a lot, both men and women, people of all ages, suffering burnout, just putting way too much pressure on themselves. Can I just throw that back at you as well?
Sure.
I'm interested to kind of hear. Obviously, you're a mental health champion over here. Do you have a similar story, or?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I suppose this is the thing about destigmatizing conversations which lead to so-called help-seeking cultures. Like our in-faculty counselling person tells me that a help-seeking culture is what you want to produce, that people feel okay about seeking help, they see that they should seek help, and that there is help for them to seek. So I guess, I feel like it's important for people like you and me to say, I had sort of crippling anxiety as a child. It wasn't diagnosed, which is a kind of, I look at that now and I think, oh God, it could have been so much easier for me if it was. But of course, my parents didn't recognise it, and I didn't recognise it either until much later. And perfectionism, absolutely, which is, from what I understand, a kind of risk factor for all manner of other mental health problems, including depression and anxiety. And what was I going to say? Oh, along with perfectionism can come negative self-talk, which is just a killer.
Constant.
Absolutely constant and absolutely brutal. Like if you talk to anyone else in the world, let's say me, if I talk to anyone else in the world like I talk to myself, I try not to do it anymore, it would be abuse. It would be actually criminal.
But I think that's a really good point. I think we all do that. We all look in the mirror and go, God, you look shit today, or whatever.
Yeah.
Imagine if you said that to one of your friends, they'd say, right, we're not mates anymore. And that's the
exactly.
thing. And yet it's absolutely fine. We legitimise it, and we think it's fine to talk to ourselves like that.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
Well, and also I think someone, maybe my psychologist, there were two things. I thought about if I spoke to my child like that, which is absolutely horrifying prospect. And of course I would never do that. And then you just think, well, how come I'm I should love myself like I love my child. But also if you try and think of yourself as how you would speak to a treasured friend, maybe child's too kind of loaded, but your treasured friends, you're supportive of them, you're kind to them. And I think the thing about negative self-talk, or indeed lack of self-compassion, like a lack of forgiveness, a lot of the negativity comes out when you make some tiny or perceived mistake and then absolutely brutally beat yourself up about that, sometimes for 10 years. I'm not even kidding. Or even more, actually. I'm still beating myself up for things I did when I was a child. You just wouldn't do that, right? You just don't do that. It's not kind. So breaking out of the trap of perfectionism and negative self-talk and cultivating self-compassion, absolutely essential. Because, I mean, how can you have good mental health if you're constantly running yourself down?
Yeah, for me, actually, the big thing, if anyone out here is empathizing with any of these, which I'm sure probably most people are, for me, the big thing that helped to break that unhealthy cycle and pattern of thoughts was mindfulness and meditation. And I said earlier, it's not a sticking plaster, it's not a solution to the problem, but certainly for me, what it helped me to do was actually almost kind of step back from my thoughts and notice when I call them kind of juicy thoughts. When you get one of those juicy thoughts creeping into your brain of like, God, you were really bad at that today, weren't you? And rather than engaging with that, because I also see a nice analogy that I use is, it's like jumping in a river. You can jump in a river with that thought, and then before you know it, you step back off the shore and you're a mile away from where you jumped in, and you're all of a sudden, you're like, oh my God, I've driven like 3 miles, and I've been thinking about this negative thing the whole way. And so it's actually about training your brain to not engage with those thoughts. And I just wanted to share that for anyone who has similar struggles or problems. That's a really useful technique to get better at that and avoid those negative thought patterns.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because I guess the research shows that there's a cognitive load in these, negative thoughts. Yeah. It takes up quite a large proportion of your brain power, just as poverty takes up a large proportion of people's brain power. So they're actually less able to, do the thinking that needs to be done, do the work that needs to be done, because, it's like, as you say, your brain is taken up with these kind of negative things. So if you can snap yourself out of that, which is, of course, easier said than done, but there are resources available to help with that. And recognising it, I would say, is the first thing. Yep. Then you're in a better state than you would otherwise be. So let's see, how much time have we got? Oh, we should be throwing to questions. Is there anything else you want to say?
Well, I didn't answer your question about what next.
Oh, what next? Yes.
One thing I did want to say while I'm up here is we've had loads and loads of interest from architects, not just in the UK, but in the States, and also some in Australia as well. So what we're really keen to try and do is actually expand this out. I mean, we can't pretend that we have the answers for everybody, and as we've kind of discussed, a lot of these issues, while similar, are location-specific, culture-specific. So we would love to see other groups set up globally and to try to, even if it's just creating a safe space for people to come and talk about mental health problems in Melbourne, in New York, in Edinburgh, wherever it might be. So if anybody out there is interested in setting up a mental health group over here, please do get in touch with me, tweet me or LinkedIn me or something. We'd be really keen to talk to people about that.
I should just say it's been very remiss of me not to say that this project is a collaboration with Mariam Goucher, who's here in the audience, is my colleague at Monash University. And in fact, Mariam is a kind of quiet force behind a lot of what happens at Parlour. Sometimes not visible, but absolutely completely integral to the project. So do we have questions? Oh, there's lots.
Thank you. That's fantastic and such a good thing to be talking about in this forum. I've just got a couple of statements, but one thing is my daughter, in my oversharing way, has actually been diagnosed with bipolar recently. She's a high achiever studying law. And what I've realised, and through this, going through it with her, is that actual mental health issues are actually genetic and environmental. And I don't think people realise that. It's not like I've had a bad day or I got a bad mark and then I, depressed. It's actually a fracturing in the wiring of the brain, is the current thought. And I am the person who actually said, why don't you get up and go for a walk? You'll be feeling much better, like go do yoga. And her psychologist quite rightly got very shitty with me and said, if she had brain cancer, would you tell her to go for a walk? Or if she had a broken leg, would you tell her to go for a walk? And I went, well, of course not. And she said, well, that's what it is. And I think it's a learning experience, and I felt that I was pretty, okay, and I've always done the "are you okay" thing, but I really didn't have a clue. So it is a learning point. I think as a practice owner, and 75% of architects actually own their own practices, we not only have no business training at university, or how to run a business, we have no idea about OH&S. The Institute has practice notes and that's great, but we don't really understand. And if you haven't experienced it firsthand or as someone close, you really don't know. And this has been very enlightening for my practice. I have an older gentleman who works with me, who works part-time, and he has anxiety issues, and I know that he can't come into work on certain days. I wonder whether Patrick Schumacher, when he's talking about Zaha Hadid, actually had any women who are mothers working in that practice. And I think that there is I was on something for Curtin recently, Curtin University, and the students came in and said, we're just exhausted, over 50% have got anxiety issues. And the lecturers are saying, well, that's what you do in practice. And I'm not saying the same, And I think that as all of us as professionals and senior professionals need to get that OHSS, we need to have business training. We need to know what the facts are and what the law is. But having this conversation is fantastic and well needed. Thank you.
Thanks.
If I could make a point on the education side of things, I think educating people, ideally at university, about mental health and about mental health problems would actually could have a really positive impact. In the same way, educating people about things like the importance of sleep. There's a great book by Matthew Walker called Why We Sleep. And as soon as I read that book, I was like, okay, I do not sleep enough. I need to sleep a hell of a lot more. And I think if a lot of students read that, it would be really positive. Similarly, there's a 1 or 2 day course that you can do called Mental Health First Aid. I don't know if it exists in Australia.
It does.
It does. I would, firstly, if anyone's interested in the subject, thoroughly encourage you to sign up for that course, because it blew my mind. Probably a poor choice of words given the topic, but anyway, it really opened my eyes to the subject. And I think if we were to teach that maybe at high schools, I think we could eradicate stigma around mental health in a single generation.
Yeah, actually, and it is worth, as we all know, right? Like, there are many, many good organisations in Australia and resources in Australia. Excellent, in fact. Black Dog Institute, Beyond Blue, Headspace, the list goes on and on and on. So, and I think some of the issues in architecture are particular to particular architectural work cultures and educational cultures, but actually the issues are also across the board in the population, and certainly in all students, but architecture students as a subset of students. So I think availing ourselves of the excellent resources that exist already would be very wise. Val? Yeah, probably.
That was a great talk, so thank you very much about that. I've also done quite a lot of work on work-life balance. Within that research, we measure things like burnout, and we measure things like life satisfaction, which we know are very strongly linked to people's well-being. And one of the things that I noticed that you didn't mention was the project nature of the work so much. And what we found, we had a large ARC linkage, and we followed 6 live projects, and we looked at one of the projects over a sort of a 6-month period, and on a construction site there are fluctuating workloads that occur. So typically for the builder, they're trying to make sure that they're going to be able to bill quite a lot of money at the end of the month, so they start off slower, and then they're quickening up, and then when there's certain parts of the project coming on, work really significantly increases. And we developed some interventions in which people had employee choice for rostering because there was night work, and we also got people to, when there were downturns, to actually be taking some time off, and then we could measure the effect. And we found that the effect on the next large increase in the finding that they didn't have the balance in their work and life, would often be less. And I was wondering about the nature of projects with architecture, because presumably you're not just working on the one project. You've got these competing demands, and I imagine as a sole practitioner, you're maybe worried about job security, so you're always taking on jobs. So I was wondering if you could comment on that project nature of architecture and health and wellbeing. Yeah.
Well, I think from my personal experience, one of, as you highlight, one of the most stressful or anxiety-causing parts of architecture can actually be that sort of spinning plate nature. You've got a project over here and a plate spinning over here, one over here, and it's, how do you keep all of them running alongside each other? And I don't have a magic answer or a silver bullet to that, but it's something I think we definitely need to be aware of. Employers need to be aware of, and kind of overloading teams, and it's something I think happens in a lot of practices as well. Certain directors get certain teams they like working with, so you get some teams that are really overloaded, while other teams might be slightly, quieter. And I think that's just something that needs to be considered at that high level. I also think that question of kind of deadline culture, or the fact that you do get like real peaks and troughs in architecture, it's something that inherently makes the industry more challenging in terms of mental health, because it's not like some industries where you can just work 40 hours every week and just have a very steady flow of work. Some weeks you might only need to do 25, other weeks you might have to do 80. So I think it's a challenging issue, and I'm not saying that we should never work late, but certainly for me, something that I've just tried to do a lot more is ask myself at 5:45, do I really need to be here? And encourage our other staff members to do the same, because more often than not you realise you're staying out of habit rather than you're staying because you genuinely need to be there.
Also, you mentioned precarity or precariousness, which is, of course, that's a big one. It's a big one for students as well as for practicing architects, or many, not all practicing architects, but many practicing architects. But I guess the other thing, the big elephant over every room now, is the precariousness that we all find ourselves in because of the coming climate change catastrophe. So precarity is not a good, is not particularly conducive to good mental well-being. So, I think they're difficult, they're interesting times, let's say. We'd probably have time for, let's see, or maybe 2 more questions if they're quick. There's one there.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Naomi. My name is Doug Lynch. I'm actually an intensive care doctor, and I work for the RFDS. I'm actually part of a sort of medical version of something like Parlour. You're very careful to say that you're not offering health advice, and I think that's quite clever and smart, but there are so many parallels between the experience of medical practitioners to what you're talking about. And we have frightening numbers of suicide, so essentially we're experiencing the same stuff that you're experiencing, and I think that I find it quite strange that medicine doesn't actually talk to the other professions very much and find out what you know and see if you can share. So related to that, we get a lot of resilience training, and we're getting so much resilience training, there's a backlash against it, and we actually need resilience training for the resilience training. I think you all know what I mean. So, look, and there's lots of sophisticated advocacy and research going on around it, and I was wondering, seeing as what you guys have both done in your area, if you actually have collaborated with medical people who are looking into our own workforce issues, which are, I think, very similar to yours. Yes,
I'm really glad you raised that, actually, because there are professions who do have quite well-developed programs, and I'm thinking here of the lawyers. The lawyers have quite good, from what I understand, industry-based programs for support and well-being, and I'm thinking in particular of the Tristan Jepson Foundation. And of course, there are also specific occupational groups and cultures who are known to have very bad well-being situations. Medical doctors being one, vets being another. The vets are in a terrible state. And and other groups who you might expect to have quite challenging situations because of the nature of their work. So, for example, first responders and police, and also nurses who are exposed to a very high level of harassment and violence in the workplace. So, one of the things that we're hoping to do in this project, very much like Parlour actually, is to look at what is happening in these other professions who have a lot of commonalities with architecture, and steal all the good ideas. And then share them back again.
Yeah, I think we all need to talk more. I think that's really key. I joined a group earlier this year, and they're actually born out of people working in the city, bankers and finance, because, as you can imagine, also very high stress, big mental health problem area. And so by collaborating with them, I've been to 6 monthly sessions with them now, and I've learned things that I would never have learned just from architects. And we've got to be careful we don't get caught in that kind of loop of just talking to each other and discussing the same problems again and again.
But also, early in the genesis of the project, which has taken many forms, I was talking to a psychiatry academic at Sydney Uni, and he was quite interested in architects because he said, there's all the commonalities of the professions, like, the selflessness of the professions and the altruism and the sense of contributing to the common good and the sense that you put others before yourself. But he was also fascinated by the fact that architecture is a creative industry, so it's got these complexities around ideas of creativity and fulfillment and expression, which is often very constrained, actually, as we all know in architectural practice. It's not like pure unfettered creativity, which can cause disappointment. And the other thing is that he said, I think architects, like doctors, are selected for perfectionism. Like, that is how you get into the degree course. And so already you've got a cohort of people who have those kinds of tendencies in them already, which are then exacerbated by certain work cultures.
Yeah, we could probably talk for another hour, so unfortunately we won't be able to, but that was one of the questions I was going to ask you, Naomi. Do you think that we are actually, is it the industry that does it to us, or are we part of the problem as well, just the types of people we are? But
yeah, I think it's both.
A conversation for another day.
So I think we've probably run out of time, unless we take one more. No, okay, we've run out of time. Thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you, Naomi.